Have you ever loved someone the whole world was against? Serena Carter had everything: talent, passion, and a life-changing opportunity. But on the Super Bowl halftime show stage, her violin string snapped. 1 second, 2 seconds, then the stadium erupted in laughter. The media called her the disgrace of the Super Bowl. And Nathaniel Harrington, a billionaire, her lover, just stood there, silent. 10 years later, Serena vanished from the spotlight. But one day, Nathaniel hears a violin piece only Serena had ever played. The musician, a 9-year-old girl, his daughter. He never knew he had a child, nor that his own mother had destroyed Serena's career. Now, as Elena stands on the very stage that once shattered her mother's dreams, will history repeat itself, or will Nathaniel finally protect his family? Stay tuned, because this story is just beginning. Super Bowl halftime show, 10 years ago. SoFi Stadium, Los Angeles. Super Bowl halftime show. SoFi Stadium blazed like a beacon against the Los Angeles night. 80,000 spectators filled the stands, with millions more watching from their screens. The atmosphere was electric as the halftime show reached its next performance. From above, the stage lights dimmed, then focused on Serena Carter. She stood alone on the massive circular stage, a violin in her hands, her sapphire blue gown shimmering like a precious gem under the spotlight. This was the moment she had waited for her entire life. Amidst a night of extravagant performances from the world's biggest stars, she was the first violinist ever to play a solo at the Super Bowl. If she succeeded, she would become a legend. If she failed, she would be forgotten. Serena took a deep breath, forcing her racing heart to slow. The roar of the crowd thundered around her. She knew that somewhere out there were those who loved her music, but just as many doubted her. Who invited an unknown violinist to the Super Bowl? Does she even deserve to be here? The voices flickered in her mind, but didn't linger. She had fought too hard, sacrificed too much, to let doubt take hold now. This was her moment. From the VIP section, Nathaniel Harrington never took his eyes off the stage. He couldn't breathe. Serena was breathtaking, more than he had ever imagined. She was no longer the violinist who once played in a small bar. She was a star, and yet his heart was gripped by unease. He didn't know why. Maybe it was because of Victoria Harrington, his mother, whose cold gaze swept across the stage with quiet disapproval. Victoria crossed her arms, taking a slow sip of her wine, a vague smile playing on her lips. Nate knew that smile too well. She had never accepted Serena. But tonight, the feeling in his chest wasn't just anxiety. It was something deeper, something more ominous. His hands clenched into fists, but there was nothing he could do except wait. The announcer's voice boomed through the stadium's massive speakers. And now, making history as the first ever violin soloist on the Super Bowl stage, the extraordinary, the breathtaking Serena Carter. The lights went out. Darkness swallowed everything. The moment stretched into eternity. Then, a single white spotlight flared, illuminating Serena. She lifted the violin to her shoulder, closed her eyes, and took a slow, steady breath. And then, the first note rang out. Crystal clear, hauntingly beautiful. The sound of her violin soared through the vast stadium, each note like a raindrop falling into a silent lake. The roar of the crowd faded into nothingness. It was as if the entire world had stopped to listen. Serena wasn't just playing. She was telling a story. Her fingers danced across the strings, the bow gliding at first delicately, then with growing intensity, pulling the audience into a whirlwind of emotion. A soft breeze swept across the stage, lifting the hem of her gown as she moved with the music. Her eyes shone, unwavering, as if she were staring into the very soul of the world, fearless, unshaken. In the VIP section, Nate felt every note like a blade carving into his heart. He wanted to be proud. He wanted to be happy for Serena, but the unease inside him refused to fade. He turned to Victoria. She remained composed, sipping her wine as if this were nothing more than an ordinary performance. But Nate knew his mother too well. The blinding stage lights swept across the vast sea of people, illuminating tens of thousands of faces turned toward the stage. Excitement, anticipation, breathless suspense gleamed in the eyes of 80,000 spectators. They had witnessed spectacular performances from the biggest names in the industry, but now all attention was on Serena Carter, an unknown violinist who, somehow, held one of the most pivotal moments of the night in her hands. The violin's melody rang clear and pure, like raindrops falling onto a still lake, then surged forward, powerful as crashing waves. Serena played as if she were breathing through the music, living within each note. She saw nothing but light, heard nothing but the sound of her own violin. In the front rows, the audience was beginning to fall under her spell. Some closed their eyes, as if to let themselves be carried away by her music. Others stared in quiet awe, mesmerized by the grace, the passion, the fire in her every movement. The cameras zoomed in, capturing her from every angle. A young, beautiful violinist standing proud beneath a sky of glittering lights. On the stadium's massive LED screens, a television reporter leaned into his mic, his voice brimming with exhilaration. Serena Carter, this young violinist, is creating magic at the Super Bowl. This could be the moment that propels her to stardom. She was down to her final notes. The crescendo was coming. She could feel the audience's anticipation swelling, waiting for that one final explosion of sound. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, pressed the bow harder, and then, bang, a sharp, hollow snap. Her eyes flew open. The violin had gone silent. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The entire stadium sank into an eerie, unnatural silence. Tens of thousands of voices that had been cheering moments ago now dissolved into confusion. First, bewilderment, then suspicion. On the giant screen, Serena's face was ghostly pale. Beads of sweat dotted her forehead. Her breathing was unsteady. She looked down at her violin as if it were something utterly foreign to her. She blinked, struggling to register what had just happened. And then she saw it. The broken string. A clean, precise snap. It dangled lifelessly against the violin's body, like a silver thread stretched too far beyond its limit. Her blood turned to ice. No, this couldn't be real. This wasn't something that could happen. Not now. Not at this moment. She had checked her strings before stepping onto this stage. They had been perfect, taut, strong. This wasn't possible. From the front rows, where celebrities and industry giants sat, murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. What just happened? Did she forget the piece? Wait, can violin strings even break like that? Reporters exchanged glances, fingers poised over keyboards, ready to send out the headline of the night. A career-defining moment, turning into a catastrophic failure before millions of eyes. In the VIP section, a powerful sponsor of the event raised an eyebrow, swirling the wine in his glass. Who was she again? Some unknown violinist. On social media, thousands of tweets flooded in within seconds. Somewhere in the crowd, someone chuckled. Just one person, but it was enough. A tiny crack in the ice. Then another laugh. And then, a sharp whistle pierced the silence. Someone get her another violin. A voice called out from the highest rows. Lip syncing is fake, and now violin playing too? And like a storm, it spread. Snap, snap, snap. Camera flashes exploded from every angle. Serena bit down on her lip, fighting back the wave of panic rising in her chest. She tried again, pressed the bow to the strings, but there was nothing but deafening, crushing silence. Her heart pounded erratically. Everything was spinning. Thousands of faces, thousands of eyes, all on her, waiting to see what she would do next. She had never feared the stage, not once in her life. But now, at the pinnacle of her greatest humiliation, all she wanted was to disappear, to scream, to run, but her feet wouldn't move. She was drowning, right here on the biggest stage of her life. Serena stood there. Everything around her shattered into a storm of jagged shards. Laughter, murmurs, the relentless flashing of cameras, all of it closing in, crushing her, dragging her down into the abyss of humiliation. She tried to breathe, but the air felt thin, as if the world itself had been drained of oxygen. She wanted to move, to say something, anything, but her body refused to respond. Her heart pounded violently against her ribs, so fast, so erratic that she felt like she might collapse at any moment. Somewhere in the distance, a voice cut through the chaos. "Get off the stage." Serena blinked rapidly. Her vision blurred. She knew. She had to leave. But how? How could she turn her back and walk away with tens of thousands of eyes watching, waiting for her break? She wanted to scream, but her throat had closed up. Her breaths came in ragged gasps. Her hands were ice cold. She had never felt so alone. Nate couldn't move. He stared down at the massive stage, at Serena, standing there, trapped in a sea of merciless spectators. Under the glare of the stadium lights, she looked so fragile, so heartbreakingly small. She didn't deserve this. She didn't deserve to be mocked, to be torn apart like this. Rage surged inside him, burning through his veins, so intense it was almost unbearable. He had to do something. He had to get to her. Nate shot up from his seat, his pulse hammering as he made to rush toward the stage. But a hand clamped down on his arm. Firm, unyielding. His head snapped to the side. Two of the Harrington family's bodyguards were holding him back. Their expressions were blank, their eyes as cold and mechanical as machines. Nate yanked his arm, but they didn't budge. "Let me go," he snarled, fury seething in his voice. But they made no move to release him. One of them, a tall, stone-faced man, leaned in and murmured, "Sir, Mrs. Victoria has ordered you to remain seated." Nate went still. Mrs. Victoria? His heart slammed against his ribs. Slowly he turned. His mother was sitting there, calm as ever, her fingers curled loosely around a glass of red wine. The liquid swirled gently as she tilted her wrist, unhurried, leisurely. Her gaze drifted toward the stage, detached, uninterested, as if what was unfolding before her had nothing to do with her at all. But Nate knew her too well. That faint, almost imperceptible smile on her lips, one he had seen all his life, held something far more terrifying than mere indifference. She had known. She had known this would happen. Had she done something? No, that was impossible. Wasn't it? But then why wasn't she surprised? Why did she look satisfied? Nate's fists clenched, his nails digging into his palms. A cold chill slithered down his spine. His mind raced, piecing everything together. His mother had never approved of Serena. She had always wanted her gone. She had the power, the connections, the influence. And now, when Serena was being destroyed in front of the entire world, she wasn't shocked. Not even a little. "What did you do, Mother?" Nate sucked in a slow, sharp breath, forcing down the rage clawing up his throat. But his eyes stayed locked on Victoria, searching for something. Any flicker of reaction, any shift in her expression, something that would confirm the terrible suspicion rising inside him. But she simply lifted her glass and took a small, delicate sip, as if everything was unfolding exactly as planned. His stomach twisted painfully. Slowly, he turned his gaze back to the stage. Serena was still standing there, still alone. Her face was drained of color, the light in her eyes gone. Only raw, suffocating despair remained. And him, he couldn't do a damn thing to save her. For the first time in his life, Nate felt utterly powerless. He had everything, wealth, status, power, and yet none of it could stop this. None of it could shield the woman he loved from this moment. Victoria tilted her head slightly, her gaze finally meeting his. Her voice was soft, almost gentle. "Do you see now, Nathaniel? This is why I told you to stay away from her." Dawn after the night of ruin, Los Angeles awoke to a storm. Not the kind that came with thunder and rain, but the kind that swallowed an entire city in scandal and spectacle. It was the day no one could stop talking about the Super Bowl halftime show, but not because of the grand performances, not because of the dazzling lights, because of an unprecedented disaster. Every newspaper, every news broadcast, every social media post revolved around one name: Serena Carter. The headlines, the hardest blows, Super Bowl nightmare. Unknown violinist ruins the show. The New York Times. Serena Carter, a rising star who fell mid-performance. Rolling Stone. Super Bowl embarrassment. The violinist who shouldn't have been there. Los Angeles Times. The headline sprawled across every front page, each word slicing through Serena's fragile career like a knife. She hadn't just been humiliated on stage. Now, the entire world was turning against her. On Twitter, the hashtag Super Bowl disaster skyrocketed to the top of the trending list within hours. Clips of her broken violin string, the sheer panic on her face, the laughter echoing from the crowd, all of it spread like wildfire. At USA Buzz, unbelievable. Who thought it was a good idea to put an unknown violinist on the Super Bowl stage? Is the organizing team insane? At Football King, the Super Bowl is meant for legends, not some nobody ruining the show. At Violin Masterclass, as a violinist myself, I have never seen such unprofessionalism. No backup strings? Really? No one cared why the string broke. No one questioned whether it was an accident. They just needed someone to blame. And Serena was the perfect target. The next morning, every major news program dissected the disaster. Good Morning America replayed the moment her string snapped at least 3 times in the first 5 minutes of the broadcast. Entertainment Tonight brought in a music expert to analyze Serena's failure under the segment. Why Serena Carter's Super Bowl performance is a lesson in poor preparation. The Late Show turned it into comedy. I thought she can play the violin. Turns out she was here for stand-up, the host joked. The audience erupted into laughter. And just like that, Serena Carter became a national punchline. Serena disappeared after the show. No press conference. No statement from her or her team. They said she left the stadium in silence, wrapped in an oversized coat to avoid the paparazzi's lenses. But every door was already shutting in her face. She called her sponsors. No one answered. She emailed record labels. No replies. She reached out to brands who had once considered working with her. Every contract was quietly pulled. One night, that's all it took for Serena to fall from a rising star to nothing. She stepped inside her tiny apartment. The door clicked shut behind her. Darkness. Only the dim glow of her bedside lamp remained. She didn't turn on the lights. She didn't check her phone. She just sat down, her hands gripping the violin case, though inside, the instrument was already broken. What'd I do now? She stared at the floor, her heart hollow. She had lost everything. And the worst part, she had no idea how to stand back up. Elsewhere in the city, Nate Harrington sat in his penthouse, reading the morning papers. The headlines slammed into his face like a punch. Serena Carter, from Super Bowl's brightest hope to its biggest failure. Fury boiled in his chest. He threw the newspaper onto the table, his hands clenching into fists. He couldn't believe it. She didn't deserve this. She deserved to be protected. He reached for his phone, scrolling to her number. Then he stopped. He could still hear his mother's voice from the night before. "Do you see now, Nathaniel? This is why I told you to stay away from her." A chill ran through him. He had failed her, and now she might never forgive him. The sky over New York was an unsettling shade of gray. Thick clouds stretched endlessly, smothering the sun, casting a cold, heavy stillness over the city. Nate stood outside the door of Serena's old apartment. Locked. He had called her dozens of times over the past few days. No answer. He had searched for her in all the places they used to go, the streets she loved, the coffee shops where she'd sit for hours, scribbling down music. But there was no trace of her. No one knew where she had gone. No one knew if she was still in New York or if she had left for good. Just a year ago, she had been right in front of him, sitting on a tiny stage, playing the violin like the outside world didn't exist. As the memories surfaced, Nate closed his eyes, letting it pull him back in time. Flashback. 1 year ago, New York. Hollow Notes. A small bar tucked away in a quiet Soho street. No neon signs, no long lines at the door. It wasn't a place of extravagance, but it had something the lavish venues of the upper class never could. Music that felt real. The lighting was dim, the wooden tables old and worn, the air filled with soft murmurs of conversation and the occasional clink of cocktail glasses. But at this moment, all of that faded into the background, because on the small corner stage, a violin was singing. Serena stood beneath the warm glow of the bar's amber lights, her eyes gently closed, lost in the melody. She had no backing band, just herself and the violin. Her fingers danced along the strings, the bow moving in perfect rhythm, not mechanically, but with a soul-deep fluidity. She wasn't just playing, she was telling a story. Each note was clear, achingly tender, whispering of unfulfilled dreams, lonely nights, and a quiet longing to reach for something greater than oneself. The bar fell into absolute silence. Everyone was listening, and in the shadows of the room, sitting alone in a darkened corner, Nate Harrington couldn't take his eyes off her. He didn't know why he was here. No, maybe he did. He had been invited to an exclusive gala that night. A world of fine wine, classical symphonies, conversations laced with power and privilege. But somehow, instead of going there, he had turned onto this street, stepped into this bar, sat in this seat, just to listen to her. A girl he had never seen before, but who felt inexplicably familiar. She wasn't like the musicians he had grown up around, the ones who performed for applause, for prestige, for validation. She played as if there was no audience at all, as if music was the only thing keeping her breathing. And that was what drew him in. He sat motionless, watching her, feeling every note she played, as if she had reached into his chest and plucked the chords of his own emotions. No one in the bar recognized him. No one cared that a man in an expensive suit sat in the shadows, his untouched glass of wine sitting forgotten on the table. And he liked that. For the first time in his life, he wasn't Nathaniel Harrington, heir to the Harrington Empire. He was just a man, captivated by a woman he didn't even know. Serena played her final note, letting it hang in the air before slowly lowering her bow. No one clapped right away, not because they didn't want to, but because no one wanted to break the spell. Then applause began to spread, soft at first, then swelling into something deeper, something real. Serena smiled, a quiet, humble curve of her lips, and bowed in gratitude before stepping off the stage. And as she lifted her gaze, her eyes met his. Nate remained where he was, still seated in the dark, his blue eyes fixed on her, unwavering, unblinking. And in that moment, she knew something had changed. Serena still remembered that night, the first time she saw Nathaniel Harrington in a small bar in Soho. A stranger, sitting in the shadows, silent and still, watching her play with an intensity that unsettled her. She didn't know who he was, but when their eyes met across the room, something shifted. It wasn't the admiration of a casual listener. It wasn't the scrutiny of those who saw themselves as musical elites. It was something else, something deeper, a quiet resonance, as if in a room full of strangers, he was the only one who truly heard her. She stepped off the stage, and then, as if fate had already decided, they met. Outside, the cold air wrapped around her as she pulled her scarf tighter, the chill of the city painting her cheeks a soft shade of pink. She wasn't surprised to find him standing there, leaning against the wall, hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, his face partially hidden beneath the dim glow of a street lamp. "Are you following me?" she asked, tilting her head, half teasing. Nate shrugged, a faint smile playing on his lips, though his eyes never wavered from hers. "Not exactly," he replied, "but if I said I was drawn to the way you play, that would probably be more accurate." Serena let out a small laugh, but something about the way he said it felt real. He wasn't just saying it to flatter her. He meant it, and that was where it all began. They weren't the kind of lovers who made headlines in New York's high society. No extravagant galas, no Michelin-starred dinners, no magazine covers with sensationalized headlines. Their love story unfolded in the quiet spaces, away from the spotlight. There were nights when they wandered the city streets together, saying little, just listening to the rhythmic sound of their footsteps against the cobblestones, neon reflections shimmering on thin layers of snow. There were evenings when Nate sat on the worn-out sofa in Serena's tiny apartment, a glass of wine in hand, while she played the violin by the window. Those melodies were meant only for him, not the polished symphonies she performed for audiences. but the unfinished pieces, the raw fragments of music she had just composed, the sounds of her unspoken thoughts. And Nate never forgot how that felt. He had met countless women in his life, women from his world, beautiful, sharp, ambitious. Women who were chosen to stand beside him at high society events, women with names, legacies, and pedigrees that made them the right match. But none of them made him feel like this. With Serena, he didn't have to be Nathaniel Harrington, heir to the Harrington Empire. He was just Nate, a man who loved music, a man who loved the quiet nights spent with a woman who made him forget everything else. And that was the most dangerous part, because he knew this love was never meant to exist. Serena never dreamed of a fairy tale ending. She knew her place. She was not a princess, and Nate was not a prince. He was a man who belonged to a world she would never be a part of. She had known it from the moment she first saw him, dressed in a tailored suit, carrying the kind of presence that only came with wealth, power, and certainty. But his eyes held something different, a quiet battle, a longing even he couldn't name. She loved him, but she couldn't say it, because love like this had no future. There were nights when, after playing her final note, Nate would pull her close, holding her so tightly, as if afraid that if he let go, she would disappear. One night, he whispered against her ear, "If nothing else mattered, would you stay with me?" Serena didn't answer right away. She only tightened her grip on his hand, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady, conflicted rhythm of his heartbeat. She wanted to believe that love, if strong enough, could overcome anything. But love, sometimes, was not enough to fight the weight of the world. The days Serena and Nate spent together were the best of their lives. But like the fragile notes Serena played each night, their love was never meant to last. Because the truth was, Nate's world was not hers. Serena had always known that. But it wasn't until Victoria Harrington found out that she realized. She had never truly prepared herself to lose him. That evening, when Nate stepped into the grand Harrington estate, he found her waiting. Victoria sat in the vast, opulent living room, poised like she had been expecting him. The chandelier overhead bathed her in cold, crystalline light, reflecting off the pearl necklace she always wore, a symbol of power in the Harrington family. She didn't need to speak. Even before she opened her mouth, the room itself had already shifted into something suffocating. Nate felt it instantly. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He slipped off his coat, about to head upstairs, where her voice rang through the air, sharp, controlled, absolute. "Sit down, Nathaniel." Nate stopped. The weight of her tone froze the air. He had no choice but to take a seat across from her. She didn't look at him immediately. She reached for her wine glass instead, swirling the deep red liquid inside, her movements slow, deliberate, calculating. Finally, she lifted her gaze, and when her cold, piercing eyes met his, he knew. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Nate didn't answer, but the way she said it, with such unshakable certainty, sent a chill straight through him. Victoria Harrington always knew everything. He had been careful, so careful. The secret meetings, the late nights slipping out of Serena's apartment, always ensuring no one saw, the erased texts, the hushed phone calls. And still, she had found out. That realization left him feeling exposed in a way he never had before. His hands curled into fists on his lap, forcing himself to stay composed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "A weak lie." Victoria laughed, soft, knowing, razor sharp. She leaned back, one elegant arm draped over the plush velvet of the crimson sofa, watching him with a quiet, chilling amusement. And then, Serena Carter. 3 syllables, but they dropped into the silence like a death sentence. Nate's jaw tightened. He barely flinched, but barely was still enough. Victoria saw it, and she knew she had won. Setting her glass down on the marble table, the sound of crystal against stone echoed like a warning. When she looked at him again, the amusement was gone. All that remained was disdain. "Nathaniel," she said smoothly, "you cannot allow a black girl to ruin this family's name. No embellishments, no pretense." Her words cut through the air like a blade. Nate stared at her, his mind blank for a split second. He was not naive. He knew how his mother thought. He had grown up in this world where bloodlines, wealth, and legacy dictated everything. But hearing it so plainly, so unapologetically, it made him feel sick. His voice dropped, cold and controlled. "What are you saying?" Victoria didn't flinch. "I'm saying," she leaned forward, every word deliberate, "if you continue this mistake, it will destroy you. It will destroy this family." Each syllable was clipped, spoken like a mother scolding a foolish child. "I won't allow that to happen." Nate's teeth clenched. Rage simmered beneath his skin, burning slow but hot. How could she say this? How could she be so unaffected, so disgustingly composed, while dismissing something that meant everything to him? "Serena is not a threat," he said, his voice dangerously low. Victoria merely tilted her head. "Oh, Nathaniel," she sighed, shaking her head with a condescending smile. "Do you really think love exists outside your little fantasy world?" She stood, stepping toward the grand window overlooking the dazzling skyline of New York. "You are the heir to one of the most powerful families in America. Do you know what kind of marriages will elevate you? Do you understand the alliances that will bring you to the top?" She turned, her eyes gleaming like polished steel. "And you choose a girl with nothing but an old violin?" Nate's fists curled tighter. Victoria approached him, her perfectly manicured hand resting lightly on his shoulder. When she spoke again, her voice was low, coaxing, dangerous. "I'm giving you the chance to make the right decision, Nathaniel." A pause, and then almost sweetly, "You know what you have to do?" He wanted to shout, to tell her he didn't care about the family name, to tell her none of this mattered, that he loved Serena and he wouldn't let anyone, not even her, tear them apart. But he couldn't say it, because deep down he knew Victoria never made empty threats. And if she said she wouldn't allow this to happen, then that meant she would do whatever it took to destroy Serena if he didn't walk away. A suffocating pressure closed around his chest. For the first time in his life, Nathaniel Harrington didn't know what to do. The Grand Harrington estate was drowning in silence. The chandelier above cast a cold, glimmering light over the crimson velvet sofa, illuminating Victoria Harrington's poised yet icy expression. Nate sat motionless. His hands gripped the arms of the chair so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. His mother's words still echoed in his mind. "You cannot allow a black girl to ruin this family's name." His chest burned with anger, the fire inside him rising, clawing its way through his ribcage. He met Victoria's gaze. "I don't care about the family's name." His voice was steady, sharp, unwavering, but Victoria didn't flinch. She simply studied him with those piercing blue eyes, the eyes of a woman who had never known defeat. Then, with effortless grace, she stood and walked to the liquor cabinet. She poured herself another glass of wine, moving with a casualness that made it clear this conversation was not a negotiation. Swirling the deep red liquid in her glass, she turned back to him, her expression unreadable, her voice smooth as silk. "Do you really think you have the luxury not to care?" Nate shot up from his seat. His pulse thundered in his ears, his breath heavy with a defiance he had never dared to show her before. "Serena is not a threat." He spoke each word deliberately, his eyes burning with conviction. "She doesn't care about my wealth or my name. She only wants to play music." He exhaled sharply, and then, "And I love her." The words left his lips, clear, certain, irrevocable. But instead of being affected by his confession, Victoria merely smiled. A cold, condescending smile. "You love her?" she repeated, as if the very notion was absurd. Nate didn't waver. Victoria set her wine glass down, the delicate sound of crystal against marble cutting through the still air. Then, she stepped forward. The quiet click of her heels against the polished floor echoed like a warning. She stopped just inches from him, tilting her head, voice dropping into a whisper. "Tell me, Nathaniel, what will you do if I say no?" His body tensed. Because he knew, Victoria never spoke without meaning every single word. She was always in control, and when she wanted something, she got it. He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. She smiled again, softer this time, but there was no warmth in it, only the sharp edge of a blade. "Let me make this very clear, my son." She leaned in slightly, her voice barely above a murmur. "If you continue this mistake, I will make her disappear." The room turned cold. Her words weren't a warning. They weren't a threat. They were a promise. Nate felt the breath leave his lungs, because he understood exactly what she meant. With a single phone call, Victoria could destroy everything Serena had built. She could make sponsors withdraw, record labels turn their backs, doors in the music industry slam shut before Serena even had the chance to knock. And if that wasn't enough, she could go further. She could ensure that Serena Carter never set foot on a stage again. A wave of fury crashed through him. But beneath it, beneath the rage and the helplessness, was fear. "Do you really think you can protect her, Nathaniel?" Her voice was calm, almost amused. "I gave you everything, a life where you never wanted for anything. And now, you're willing to throw it all away for a girl who has nothing but a violin." She stepped back, arms crossing over her chest. "If that's what you believe, then you're not ready to inherit this empire." Her words cut deeper than he expected. Not because he cared about the fortune, the legacy, the carefully orchestrated future she had planned for him, but because Victoria never bluffed. If she had decided he was no longer worthy of being her successor, she would make it true. He looked down at his hands. His fingers trembled slightly, as if an invisible noose was tightening around his throat. If he fought her, he could lose everything. But if he walked away from Serena, he would lose himself. Victoria held his gaze for a long moment, giving him one final chance to choose. But when he said nothing, she made the decision for him. She turned back to the table, lifted her wine glass once more, and took a slow sip. Then, in a voice soft but lethal, she uttered the words that sealed his fate. "You have only one choice, Nathaniel." A pause, a final, unforgiving look, "and I think you know what you have to do." She set the glass down. The sharp sound of crystal against marble rang out like a gavel slamming down. A verdict passed. And with that, she walked away, leaving Nate standing there, frozen in place. Alone, with a choice he never wanted to make. Nate stood frozen in the vast, silent living room. The sound of Victoria's heels clicking against the marble floor faded, swallowed by the heavy stillness left in her wake. The air felt suffocating. But inside Nate's head, everything was screaming. He had never felt so trapped, so powerless. All his life, he had been told that family comes first, that the Harrington name was everything, that it was his duty to protect their reputation. But for the first time, he wanted to burn it all down. He wanted to protect Serena. He wanted to run to her right now, tell her the truth, take her away from all of this. But if he did, Victoria would destroy her. His fists clenched at his sides, his breath heavy, as if an invisible noose was tightening around his throat. He didn't know what to do. And then, a text notification. The sound sliced through the silence like a blade. He looked down at his phone. "Serena, I have a most amazing news." Serena's hands trembled as she reread the email for the third time. Her heart was racing. Her eyes devoured the words on the screen, afraid they would disappear if she blinked. "Congratulations. We're thrilled to inform you that you've been selected to perform at this year's Super Bowl halftime show." She let out a breathless laugh, disbelief and euphoria crashing over her all at once. This wasn't a dream. It was real. After years of playing in small bars, after countless rejections, after sleepless nights of endless practice, she had finally made it. The Super Bowl halftime show. The biggest music event in America, a stage reserved for legends. And now, her name was on that list. Without a second thought, she grabbed her phone and sent Nate a message. "Where are you? I have the most amazing news." When he didn't reply, she called him. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. The moment she heard his voice, she beamed. "Nate, you won't believe it, I know." Serena stopped mid-sentence. Something was wrong. His voice wasn't what she had expected. There was no excitement, no joy, no laughter, just quiet. "You know," she frowned. "But how? I haven't even told you yet." A pause. Then, Nate let out a soft, hollow chuckle. "I just had a feeling. Serena didn't realize that while she was soaring, Nate was falling. He wanted to tell her the truth, wanted to warn her that his mother wouldn't let this happen. But if he did, Victoria would strike immediately. Serena had no idea what was coming. And Nate, he couldn't let her find out. Congratulations, Serena. He forced himself to keep his voice steady, even as everything inside him was breaking. Victoria wasn't surprised when she received the news about Serena's Super Bowl performance. In fact, she had known before Serena did. She always knew. Nothing happened in the upper echelons of power without her knowing first. She sat in her silk-lined study, one hand cradling a glass of wine, the other flipping through a thick folder. Serena Carter, her background, her family, every performance, every connection she had in the industry. Victoria had spent years mastering the art of quiet destruction. She knew exactly how to make someone disappear, not physically, but professionally. And for Serena, she had already found the perfect way. She picked up her phone, dialing a number she had long memorized. The call was answered immediately. "Jack, I have something I need you to take care of." Jack Reynolds, Super Bowl's head of technical operations, straightened in his chair. "Yes, Mrs. Harrington." Victoria's lips curled into a small, satisfied smile, but her voice remained smooth, untouched by warmth. "The upcoming performance. I need a small technical issue to occur." Jack hesitated. "I'm sorry, ma'am. What exactly do you mean?" Victoria didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. People like Jack learned very quickly to understand what was left unsaid. "Nothing catastrophic," she reassured, her tone effortlessly persuasive. "Just a slight mishap. Something that might cost a young artist her one and only chance." She swirled the wine in her glass, watching the deep red liquid catch the light like spilled blood. Jack swallowed hard. Then, slowly, hesitantly, he nodded. "Understood, ma'am." Victoria's smile deepened. "Good." She ended the call, setting the phone down with delicate precision. Then, taking a slow sip of wine, she gazed out the window at the glittering skyline of New York. The stage was set, and soon, Serena Carter would fall. That night, Serena Carter was destroyed, not by her own mistake, but by a plan so meticulously crafted, so ruthlessly executed, that she never stood a chance. A broken string, a stadium erupting in cruel laughter, a storm of flashing cameras, capturing the exact moment a young artist lost everything on the biggest stage of her life. Serena had believed this night would change her world, and it did, just not in the way she had ever imagined. She left that stage and never returned. She disappeared. No statements, no explanations, not a single trace left behind. Serena Carter, the promising violinist of that night, never played again. Nate lost her. He searched. He called. He tried everything. But Serena was gone. No one knew where she had gone. No one knew if she was still standing or if she had fallen. And the world kept turning. New headlines took over. New scandals filled the airwaves. People forgot her as quickly as they had destroyed her. But Nate never did. Serena Carter vanished from the world she once dreamed of. Nathaniel Harrington lost her in the very moment he realized he loved her most. 10 years passed, and the past, long buried, long forgotten, was never truly gone. Fate was never finished. Not really. If you were Nate, would you have the courage to right your greatest wrong? If you were Serena, could you forgive, or would you turn away once more? The Super Bowl had taken everything from Serena, but 10 years later, would destiny grant her a second chance? Could a love once lost find its way home again? Step into the next chapter. 10 years later, the road to redemption. New York, Harrington Industries Tower. The city was just as loud, just as alive as ever. Skyscrapers glowed under the fiery hues of sunset. The streets pulsed with endless streams of traffic. Billboards and neon signs flashed along the avenues, illuminating a world that never slept. But inside the top-floor office of Harrington Industries, where Nate Harrington stood, there was only silence. He gazed out through the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city stretch beneath him like a labyrinth of light and shadow. Much like his own life, he had everything, a billion-dollar empire, more power than most could ever dream of. And yet, he had never felt emptier. 10 years ago, he had believed success would make things easier. He had thrown himself into his work, built his own empire, proved that he didn't need his mother's control. He expanded the company, invested in groundbreaking projects, moved from meeting to meeting without a moment to breathe. He had the luxury of excess, the extravagant parties, the polished social circles, the women who were perfect on paper. But when the lights dimmed, when the deals were signed, when the laughter of strangers faded into the night, he was alone. No one to share the moments that truly mattered. No one to sit beside him in the long, sleepless hours of contemplation. No one to fill the void inside him. No Serena. He had convinced himself that time would erase her. But every time he closed his eyes, she was there. That first night he saw her, standing under the warm glow of a bar in Soho, the violin resting against her shoulder as she played. The nights they spent together, when she would smile softly and say that music was the only way she could express the things she could never put into words. And that night, the night he lost her forever, he still remembered the look in her eyes as she stared down at her broken violin, as the laughter of tens of thousands surrounded her like a suffocating net. Fear, pain, betrayal, and then she was gone. He had searched for her, but she had never wanted to be found. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Mr. Harrington, his secretary's voice. He blinked, realizing night had almost fallen. "Come in," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. The door opened, and his secretary stepped inside, holding a stack of documents. She spoke, listing off updates and requests, but Nate barely heard a word. He nodded, signed where needed, gave brief instructions, but his mind was elsewhere. Work had once been his escape. Now it wasn't enough. He set his pen down, exhaled, and stood, shrugging his jacket over his shoulders. "Shall I arrange the car for tonight's charity gala, sir?" she asked. He hesitated. Another event. Another night surrounded by false smiles and empty conversations. But something inside him, something he couldn't quite name, told him he should go. "Yes," he said, "I'll be there." He had no idea that tonight would change everything. That tonight, a truth long buried would come to light. That tonight, he would come face to face with the path he should have taken 10 years ago. New York at night still shone as bright as ever. Traffic stretched endlessly down Fifth Avenue, headlights casting streaks of gold against the city's steel and glass. Towering skyscrapers loomed above, their windows glowing like constellations. Billboards bathed the streets in neon light, painting a picture of a world that never slept. A world where only the elite belonged. Nathaniel Harrington was one of them. He stepped out of his sleek black Rolls-Royce, completely indifferent to what awaited him inside. Another charity gala. Another evening filled with familiar faces, empty conversations, and carefully constructed lies. Since childhood, he had attended more of these events than he could count. The handshakes, the shallow pleasantries, the veiled schemes disguised behind polite smiles. All of it was just part of the world he had been born into. And tonight, he expected nothing different. What he didn't know was that within these walls, a truth buried for 10 years was about to be exposed. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered beneath the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in breathtaking gowns filled the space, their laughter mingling with the clink of champagne flutes. Nate entered, nodding in acknowledgement at the familiar faces. A few guests approached him, business moguls, politicians, women with sharp eyes who were always looking for the next powerful connection. He responded mechanically. None of it mattered. Until, "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention?" A voice rose above the hum of the room. Nate turned. A middle-aged man stood at the center of the crowd, a glass of wine in hand, his graying hair slightly disheveled. There was something vaguely familiar about him. Then, as the lights shifted, recognition struck. Nate froze. Jack Reynolds, a name he hadn't thought about in years. A man who once held power in the world of live productions. But that wasn't why Nate remembered him. No, Jack had been the head of technical operations at the Super Bowl the year Serena performed. And more than anyone, Nate knew Serena hadn't broken that violin string on her own. A sick feeling curled in his stomach. Jack, already flushed with alcohol, raised his glass higher. 30 years in this industry, he mused with a lazy grin. I've seen it all. The triumphs, the disasters, and the secrets no one ever talks about. A few people chuckled. To them, he was just another man rambling after one too many drinks. But Nate didn't laugh. Something was very, very wrong. Jack took another sip, shaking his head with mock nostalgia. Does anyone remember that Super Bowl? He asked, voice dipping lower, teasing the crowd. The one with the violinist? A few murmurs of recognition. Others barely reacted. But to Nate, the entire room blurred. His pulse thundered in his ears. He wanted to move, to stop this, but his body was frozen in place. Jack chuckled. You know, funny thing about that performance, he leaned in conspiratorially, though his voice was still loud enough for those nearby to hear. That string? It didn't snap on its own. The world around Nate came to a halt. A flicker of unease passed through the room. Some people paused their conversations. Others turned, curiosity piqued. Jack swirled his wine, clearly reveling in the attention. Everyone thought it was just bad luck, a technical failure. He let out a low laugh, shaking his head. But the truth is, he grinned. Someone paid a hell of a lot of money to make sure that girl never had her moment. Nate couldn't breathe. Jack had just spoken aloud the one thing he had always feared, the truth he had suspected but could never prove. But the worst part, the part that would haunt him forever, hadn't been said yet. A woman nearby, intrigued, raised an eyebrow. Who would do something like that? Jack shrugged, his smile turning almost playful. Then, with deliberate slowness, he uttered her name, Victoria Harrington. Silence crashed over the ballroom. A few gasps, whispers, shifting glances. But Nate heard nothing, because in that moment, the world fell away. He had always known, but hearing it, confirming it, from the very man who had played a role in it. It was a direct blow to the gut. He stood there, motionless, his fingers clenched around the stem of his glass, rage simmering just beneath the surface. 10 years ago, he had lost Serena. He had let his mother destroy her. And now he knew the truth. And this time, he wasn't going to stay silent. The Harrington Industries private jet touched down on a quiet airstrip just outside Boston. Nate had never imagined himself in a place like this. No towering skyscrapers, no flashing billboards, no relentless pace of a life he had always known. Only endless fields, sleepy little towns, narrow streets bathed in the warm glow of the afternoon sun. This was not his world, and yet he was here. He had told his shareholders this was part of a new initiative, a plan to expand a foundation for young musical talents, to seek out the next generation of artists who could redefine the industry. But the truth was, he was looking for Serena. No one knew where she was. She had disappeared from the glamorous world she once fought so hard to be part of. But there was one thing he was certain of: she could never give up music. She could hide from a stage, from the media, from everything that had broken her. But she could not live without playing. And if she was still playing, somewhere, anywhere in this world, he would find her. Stepping out of the car, Nate took in his surroundings. The town was smaller than he had expected. A single main street stretched across a few blocks, lined with aging two-story buildings, a handful of cafes, a small bookshop, and a tiny theater with a faded marquee sign. Nothing remarkable, but it was places like these that people ran to when they didn't want to be found. At a roadside cafe, he settled into a corner seat, ordered a black coffee, and simply listened. The people here spoke in soft, familiar tones, casual talk about the weather, the harvest, the little things that made up their lives. No one looked at him for too long. To them, he was just another stranger, a well-dressed outsider, perhaps, but nothing more. And that was good. He didn't want to be noticed. He only wanted to hear. Because if Serena had truly lived here for the past 10 years, someone had to know her. The cafe door chimed as a group of locals walked in, their laughter filling the space with the quiet warmth of a late afternoon. Nate barely paid them any attention, until a passing remark. Tonight's recital should be lovely. The kids have come so far. Serena's a wonderful teacher. His fingers froze midair. His breath hitched just slightly. He looked up, but the person who had spoken was already gone, disappearing behind the counter. Serena. Serena who? How many people in the world had that name? No, it couldn't be a coincidence. But he couldn't rush this. He needed to be sure. He needed more. So when he left the cafe, instead of heading back to his hotel as planned, he started walking. No destination, no plan, only a pull he couldn't explain. And then a breeze swept through the quiet street. And from somewhere in the distance, a melody rose into the air. A sound so achingly familiar that for one terrifying, breathtaking moment, his heart stopped. A soft breeze drifted through the town, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and freshly brewed coffee from the small cafes lining the street. The town was quiet, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, with only a few people strolling leisurely along the sidewalks. But in that stillness, something stopped Nate Harrington dead in his tracks. Music, a melody he could never forget. A violin piece he hadn't heard in 10 years. His chest tightened, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Impossible. For a fleeting second, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. But no, the music was real. The notes carried through the air, weaving into the golden light of dusk, slipping into every quiet corner of the street. Nate turned, his gaze drawn to the source of the sound like an invisible force pulling him in. And then he saw her. Under the awning of a small, worn-down bookstore, a little girl, no more than 9 years old, stood with a violin resting against her shoulder. His entire body froze. Her stance, straight-backed, poised, yet brimming with emotion, sent a chill down his spine. The wind gently pushed back her soft curls, revealing a face lost in pure concentration. She closed her eyes as she played, surrendering to the music as if the world around her no longer existed. Her small fingers danced across the strings with effortless precision, her bow gliding seamlessly as if she had known this song her entire life. She never glanced down, never hesitated, and each time she pulled the bow across the strings, her body moved in perfect rhythm, leaning into the notes like the music was a part of her. Just like Serena used to. Nate couldn't breathe. It wasn't the flawless technique that had him paralyzed. It was the way she played. It wasn't just skill. It was feeling. Every time she reached a high note, her heels lifted slightly off the ground, as if the music was carrying her upward. Every time she pressed harder on the bow, her lips pressed together, her entire being telling a story without words. Just like Serena, Nate had seen this before. Not once, hundreds of times. Those quiet nights in her tiny apartment. The stolen moments when she played only for him. The way she would smile with her eyes closed, as if music alone could lift her away from everything that hurt. And now, this little girl was doing the exact same thing. As if Serena was alive inside her. At first, no one in the street had paid attention to the child. But then, one by one, people began to stop. A woman stepping out of a cafe froze in place near the door. An elderly man on his evening walk slowed his steps, listening. Others turned to one another, their faces mirroring the same quiet awe. No one spoke. No one interrupted. They simply stood there, captivated, because this music was unlike anything they had ever heard before. And Nate felt his entire world crumbling around him. The little girl reached the final notes, holding the last sound in the air for just a moment longer, letting it linger. Then, she lowered her bow, exhaling softly, her eyes glowing with pure joy. The kind of joy that came from being completely lost in music. Nate sucked in a sharp breath, but it felt like his lungs couldn't expand. He had heard this song before. He had seen someone play it this way before. And the only person in the world who could was Serena Carter. For 10 years, he had searched for her. For 10 years, there had been nothing, not a single trace. He had believed she was gone forever. But now, standing before him, in a quiet town where no one knew her name, a little girl was playing exactly like her. And if she was 9 years old, Nate's chest constricted, because that could only mean. Nate stood frozen, the world around him blurred, as if time itself had slowed to a crawl. In front of him, the little girl remained blissfully unaware of the storm unraveling inside the stranger, watching her so intently. Elena. She carefully tucked away her violin, her expression still glowing with the simple joy of finishing a piece well played. That innocent, effortless smile. But to Nate, it was a punch to the chest, a ghost from his past, a reflection of something he had spent 10 years trying to bury. And then, as if something beyond his control was pulling him forward, he stepped closer. His voice escaped before he could stop himself. "You play beautifully." The girl flinched slightly at the unexpected compliment, then looked up at him. Her dark eyes flickered with momentary curiosity, but not fear. And then, just as quickly, she smiled again. It wasn't the shy, hesitant smile of a child wary of a stranger. It was calm, steady, confident. It was Serena. Serena, standing on stage all those years ago, believing with every fiber of her being that her music could change the world. A sharp, unfamiliar pain twisted in Nate's chest, but somehow he managed to keep his voice even. "Where did you learn that piece?" Elena tilted her head, as if the answer was obvious. "My mom taught me." Mom. 2 letters, but they hit Nate like a lightning strike. His breath caught. For a moment, it felt as though the entire town had tilted on its axis. His mind scrambled to process, to rationalize, to make sense of what he had just heard. But nothing could prepare him for this. Serena. Serena was still playing. Serena never let go of music. And Serena had a child. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. He fought to keep his composure, but something inside him, something deep and buried and broken, was tightening like a vice. What had he missed? What happened after that night? He didn't know how long it took him to find his voice again. When he finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "Your mom is Serena Carter?" Elena blinked, then nodded. A bright, effortless nod. A gesture so simple, yet it shattered his entire world. "Yes," she said cheerfully, completely unaware that she had just set his life on fire. 2 syllables, and nothing would ever be the same. Nate's thoughts raced. He tried to be logical, tried to search for another explanation, but the numbers all led to the same answer. Elena was around 9 years old. The Super Bowl, the night he lost Serena, was 10 years ago. Serena disappeared right after. No, it couldn't be this simple. But deep down, somewhere in the part of him that had been reaching for her ever since she left, he knew, this girl, she wasn't just Serena's daughter. She could be his. 100 questions flooded his mind all at once. But he couldn't ask. Not yet. Not when she was looking at him with pure, unguarded innocence. Not when she had no idea she had just spoken words that might change everything he had ever known. Nate swallowed hard, forcing air into his lungs. Tried to steady himself, but for the first time in his life, Nathaniel Harrington had no idea what to do next. Nate left the small street, but he didn't remember how. He didn't look back. He didn't ask more questions. He didn't try to stop the little girl from walking away. Because if he had stayed even a second longer, he knew he wouldn't have been able to control what he did next. She was too much like Serena, not just in her eyes, not just in the way she played, but in the way she stood, fearless, unaware that her very existence had just shattered his entire world. But he couldn't let his emotions consume him. Not now. He needed proof. And Nathaniel Harrington never acted without evidence. So the moment he returned to his hotel, he made a call. To the only person he trusted with something like this. "I need you to find everything you can on Serena Carter." His voice was firm, controlled, but beneath it, there was an edge. And even Nate could hear it. A pause. Then Ethan Caldwell, the man who had been Nate's right hand for years, spoke. "Serena Carter? You mean the violinist from back then?" "Yes." Ethan hesitated. "Nate, she's been gone for a decade. There's barely any information on her." Nate closed his eyes, leaning back in his chair, fingers tightening around the phone. Ethan was right. Serena had disappeared as if she had never existed. No news, no articles, no trace of her. But now he had found something. He took a deep breath, voice dropping lower. "I met a little girl today." Silence. Then Ethan's voice changed. And She's about 9 years old. Another pause. Then, do you think? Nate didn't answer immediately. He already knew the answer. He felt it deep in his bones, in the way his blood pulsed with something between dread and certainty. But he couldn't let himself believe it. Not yet. Not without the truth. Find everything you can on Serena. His voice was quiet, but unwavering. And find out about the child. 2 days later, Ethan walked into Nate's office. In his hands was a thick file. He placed it on the desk. His expression unreadable. Nate didn't move at first. He just stared at it. Because once he opened it, there would be no going back. Still, he braced himself and turned the first page. Name, Elena Carter. Date of birth, 9 years ago. Place of birth, a small hospital outside Boston. Mother's name, Serena Carter. Father's name, not listed. Nate's blood turned to ice. He flipped to the next page, and then he saw her. A photograph. Elena, the girl with the soft curls and the same dark, luminous eyes. A smile that was Serena's. And if there had been any doubt left, one look at her features erased it all. Because Elena wasn't just Serena's daughter. She was his. Ethan sat down across from him, but he didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The truth was clearer than ever. Serena had been pregnant when she left his world. She had given birth to their daughter. She had raised her alone, in a quiet town, away from the life she once dreamed of, away from the spotlight she deserved. And Nate, he had known nothing. For 10 years, he had lived in ignorance. For 10 years, he had gone on with his life, never realizing he had a child. 10 years. 10 years he had not been there. 10 years Serena had faced everything alone. 10 years lost. His hands clenched around the file, his breath unsteady. Ethan watched him carefully before speaking. What are you going to do? A loaded question. One Nate didn't have an answer for. But there was one thing he did know. He wasn't going to lose anyone ever again. Nate couldn't remember the last time he felt this out of control. But now, standing in front of this small-town cafe, he felt like he had stumbled into a reality that didn't belong to him. 2 days ago, he was still the man who had everything. A billion-dollar empire, a life of wealth and influence, the power to change anything with a single phone call. But today, he had only one question. Why? Why had Serena never told him? Why had she left, choosing to raise their child alone? And if he had never come here, would he have gone his entire life never knowing he had a daughter? The thought stole the air from his lungs. Step by step, he walked to the cafe door. Nate had seen this place in Ethan's report. A small, cozy cafe tucked into the corner of town. Not the kind of place he would ever go. No luxury, no high-profile clientele. But one thing made it more important than anywhere else in the world. Because this was where Serena Carter had spent the last 10 years of her life. He had no idea what he would say. No idea how he would face her after all this time. But he couldn't turn away. Not this time. He had let her go once. He wouldn't do it again. The door swung open, and a small bell chimed overhead. Inside, the cafe was warm and intimate. The scent of roasted coffee blending with the faint aroma of old books stacked on wooden shelves. A handful of customers sat at their tables, quietly sipping their lattes. And behind the counter, Serena. She was wiping her hands on a kitchen towel, her expression relaxed. At the sound of the bell, she lifted her head, ready to greet the customer. And then, her body froze. The towel slipped from her fingers onto the counter. And suddenly, the entire world went silent. Because after 10 years, Nathaniel Harrington was standing in front of her. 1 second, 2, 3. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. Just staring, like time had never passed. But time had passed, and in that time, too much had changed. Serena was no longer the young violinist who had once stood on the Super Bowl stage, believing music could change everything. And Nate was no longer the reckless man who had stood by, watching helplessly as her world collapsed. They had become two different people. Yet somehow, fate had brought them back to the same place. Serena's fingers curled against the counter, an instinctive reaction to the sudden rush of memories she had spent years trying to bury. She had told herself she would never see him again, that the past was behind her, that if she ran far enough, hid long enough, Nate would never find her. But now, here he was, like a ghost from a life she had erased, standing right in front of her. For a brief moment, her hands trembled, but she quickly forced the weakness away. She couldn't let him see. She wouldn't let him see. Not again. Not after everything. Nate had thought he was ready for this moment. But when he looked at Serena now, he realized he wasn't. She was still beautiful, but in a quieter way. The bold fire of the stage had softened into something deeper, stronger. There was no longer the fearless musician who had once played for the world. Instead, there was a woman who had endured, who had survived. His throat tightened, words catching before they could even form. And when he finally spoke, only one question escaped. One question that had burned in him for a decade. Why? Serena didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. Her fingers curled tighter, nails pressing into her palms. She felt like something inside her was being ripped open. The cafe continued as if nothing had changed. People sipped their coffee, pages turned, conversations drifted softly through the air. But between Nate and Serena, time had stopped. A man facing the past he let slip away. A woman facing the pain she never truly buried. Neither had prepared for this. Neither knew what would happen next. But one thing was certain. This was not a reunion. This was a reckoning. And it was only just beginning. The cafe suddenly felt too small. There were still customers around, spoons clinking against cups, quiet conversations drifting through the air. But between Nate and Serena, there was only a tension so thick it was unbreakable. They stared at each other like 10 years had never passed, like the distance between them was just a fragile thread that could snap at any moment. But they both knew it wasn't fragile at all. Serena had never expected to see him again, and Nate had never expected to stand in front of her as a man who had missed too much. And now that the past had forced its way back, there was no turning back. Serena took a deep breath, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. You didn't know, did you? It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. A sentence for Nathaniel Harrington. Nate didn't answer right away. He just stood there, watching her. His gaze held emotions she didn't want to see. Regret, guilt, pain. But she didn't care. Because 10 years ago, when she had stood alone on that stage, humiliated, abandoned, ruined, where had he been? Her fingers curled into fists, her voice sharp as she whispered, "Your mother destroyed my life." She saw Nate's body stiffen. A slow inhale, the tightening of his jaw. But he didn't deny it. Because he knew. He had always known. And you did nothing. This time, Nate lowered his head, as if finally accepting the weight of it all. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I didn't know." Serena let out a hollow laugh. One without warmth, without forgiveness. "You didn't know?" She shook her head. "Nate, do you think that changes anything? If you truly loved me, if you truly cared, how could you not have known?" He exhaled, his gaze darkening. "I knew she was against us. I knew she'd do anything to keep us apart. But I didn't know she'd go that far. Serena, I swear, I didn't know." She clenched her jaw. A part of her wanted to believe him. But the rest of her, the part that had endured 10 years of silence, couldn't. "Did you even try to find me, Nate?" Her voice was low, accusing. "Or did you just move on like I never existed?" He looked up sharply, his expression raw. "I'll look for you." Serena faltered. He said it with certainty. He took a small step forward, but still left space between them. His voice was steady, but there was something desperate beneath it. "I tried, Serena, but you disappeared. Completely. There was nothing." Her heart clenched, but she forced herself to stay composed. "If you really wanted to find me," she whispered, "you would have." It wasn't a fair accusation, but Nate didn't fight it. Because maybe she was right. Nate swallowed hard, his voice quieter now. "I'm sorry." Serena stiffened. She hadn't expected that. "I know sorry doesn't change anything," he continued, "and I don't expect you to forgive me. But you need to know, I never wanted this to happen to you." Serena had waited years to hear those words, but they had come too late. And then, "There's something I can change." Her eyes narrowed slightly. Nate inhaled deeply, then spoke the one name that would change everything. "Elena." Serena went completely still. The name hung in the air between them, cracking the shield she had spent years building. For the first time, she lost control. Her eyes widened, but just as quickly, she forced her emotions back down. You know, it wasn't a question. It was just a truth neither of them could deny anymore. Nate nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. He was no longer the hesitant young man trapped under his mother's control. Now he was certain. He knew what he wanted, and he wanted to know his daughter. I met her. Serena's fingers tensed against the counter. She hadn't prepared for this. Nate saw it. The way her body locked up, the way she instinctively tried to guard herself. But he didn't back down. I heard her play on the street. His voice dropped lower, rough with emotion. Asterisk, asterisk, do you know what song it was? Serena didn't answer. But she knew. She knew. Because Elena had played the song she once wrote. The song she had played for Nate in the quiet of the night, when she had believed that love was enough to overcome anything. But it hadn't been, and she had lost him. She's just like you, Nate murmured, his voice unsteady. The way she closes her eyes when she plays. The way she lets the music move through her. I saw you in her, Serena. Serena's chest tightened painfully. She had always seen him in Elena, but she had never imagined he would see himself in her. She didn't know how to react, so she asked the only question she didn't want to hear the answer to. And then what? Nate shut his eyes for a brief second, grounding himself. Then he met her gaze, unwavering. Serena, I know I lost 10 years with her. He didn't justify. He didn't make excuses. He simply spoke the truth. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect things to go back to how they were. His voice softened, turning into something almost pleading. But I want to make it right. You can hate me. You can tell me to leave. But please, don't take away Elena's chance to have a father. Serena's throat tightened. She had raised Elena alone. She had been everything to her daughter. Mother, protector, father, and friend. And now, Nate just walked in and decided he wanted to be her father? It was too easy for him. Too unfair for her. You think this is simple, Nate? Her voice trembled. Not with weakness, but with anger. For 10 years, I've raised her alone. I watched her take her first steps alone. I held her when she cried from fevers. I comforted her nightmares. For 10 years, I was all she had. She met his gaze, her voice turning into something sharp and wounded. And now you come back and say you want to be her father? Nate didn't back down. He understood her anger. He accepted that she had every right to hate him. But nothing could change one simple fact. Elena was his daughter. And he wouldn't lose her like he lost Serena. I'm not saying I can fix everything overnight. Nate's voice remained steady. I'm not saying this will be easy. He inhaled deeply, then met her gaze. But I'm not leaving. Not again. You can push me away, but Elena, she deserves to know who I am. Serena wanted to push him out, wanted to keep him away, wanted to maintain the walls she had spent years building. But the truth was, he wasn't wrong, and that terrified her more than anything. Because now, this story wasn't over. The past wasn't buried. And the future, she had no idea where it would lead. Serena didn't know how long she had been standing there. Maybe just a few minutes. Maybe longer. But however long it had been, she couldn't take her eyes off the scene before her. Elena and Nate, for the first time, together. She had imagined this moment in 1,000 different ways. She had imagined Nate being angry, accusing her of keeping their daughter from him all these years. She had imagined him walking away, refusing to accept responsibility. But she had never imagined this. Nate sat across from Elena, a violin case open before him. And he wasn't giving up. Elena had her arms crossed, dark eyes filled with quiet defiance. In front of her, Nate carefully lifted a brand new violin from the case. The polished wood gleamed under the golden afternoon light. For a second, Serena saw Elena's gaze flicker toward the instrument. But then, just as quickly, her expression hardened. I already have a violin, she said firmly. Nate didn't flinch. He just smiled a small, knowing smile. He understood. Elena wasn't ready to accept him. And why would she be? She had lived her entire life without him. He couldn't expect a violin to change that. But that didn't mean he would stop trying. I know, Nate said, his voice steady warm. But maybe you could try this one. I think it would suit you. Elena didn't reply, but Nate caught the smallest hesitation in her eyes. She was so much like her mother, stubborn, proud, but also fiercely in love with music. So he did the only thing he could. He lifted the violin, set it against his shoulder, and played a single note. Serena stopped breathing. The sound was not perfect, not as refined as when Elena played, not as haunting as when Serena played, but it was full of feeling. And as the note rang through the air, she saw Elena's eyebrows lift just slightly. For just a fraction of a second, curiosity flickered in her daughter's eyes. She wouldn't admit it, but she was interested, because music had a way of binding souls together. Nate met Elena's gaze, his voice soft. "I'm not very good," he admitted, "but if someone were to teach me, I think I could get better." Elena bit her lip. Her eyes sparkled just a little. Not much, but it was something. A step. After a few seconds of hesitation, she reached forward and touched the violin. "Just once," she said. "I'll show you just once." For the first time, father and daughter played together. Elena was still guarded. Nate was still clumsy, but the music found its way through, filling the spaces words couldn't reach. Serena watched from a distance, her heart unsteady. She didn't believe in miracles. She didn't believe that a man could just walk back into their lives and fix everything. But now, as she watched them, she started to wonder if maybe some things in life were worth a second chance. In the days that followed, Nate didn't leave town. He didn't push. He didn't rush. He didn't try to take anything that wasn't his to claim. He was simply there. Every morning, he came to Serena's cafe, ordered a black coffee, just like he used to, and sat in the same quiet corner, watching. He didn't force a conversation. He didn't try to convince Serena to let him in. He knew she needed time, and he knew Elena needed time. The little girl no longer avoided him like before, but she hadn't completely let him in either. She kept her distance. She watched him with wary eyes every time he showed up. But Nate never gave up. He didn't try to win her over with expensive gifts. He didn't try to use his wealth to make up for the years he had missed, because he knew that meant nothing to Elena. She didn't need a father who could buy her things. She needed a father who would stay. So that's what he did. He showed up. When Elena played her violin on the street, he listened from a distance without interrupting. When she ran around with her friends at the park, he stayed, not too close, not too far, waiting for the day she would stop looking at him like he was a stranger. When she struggled to set up chairs for a small performance at the cafe, he didn't say anything. He simply rolled up his sleeves and helped. No words, no expectations, just presence, just a quiet promise. "I am here." At first, Elena only observed, but slowly she got used to him. And then one day, Nate walked into the cafe as usual. But this time, instead of watching him from across the room, Elena walked up to him. "Do you want to hear a song?" For a second, Nate froze. Then he smiled, warmth spreading through his chest. Of course. For the first time, she played for him. No hesitation, no walls, just music. And when she finished, her eyes were softer when she looked at him. The question Serena never expected. That afternoon, as Serena wiped down the cafe counter, Elena suddenly walked up to her. She had that look, the look of a child deep in thought, trying to make sense of something too big for her small world. "Mom." Serena glanced up, surprised by the serious tone in her daughter's voice. Elena hesitated for just a second. Then, she bit her lip and asked, "Did you love my dad?" Serena froze. Nate had found a place in Elena's heart, and now she wanted to know the truth. Serena didn't know how to react. Elena had seen through her. Her question wasn't just curiosity. It was a statement, a quiet declaration that she knew something was being kept from her. Serena tried to keep her expression calm, but she felt an unfamiliar tightness in her chest. "Why are you asking that?" Elena hesitated for a moment, but then she met her mother's gaze head on. "Because I know Nate isn't just some old friend." Serena's heart skipped a beat. Elena had always been smart, too smart, and Nate, he had made her start asking questions. A confrontation long overdue. The next morning, when Nate walked into the cafe like he did every day, he didn't hesitate. He didn't sit in his usual quiet corner. This time, he made the first move. "We need to talk." Serena studied him for a moment, then let out a quiet sigh before leading him to the back patio, somewhere private, somewhere away from prying eyes. Nate didn't waste time. She's asking questions. Serena clenched her fists slightly, but her voice remained steady. So what? Nate frowned, clearly unsatisfied with the response. You know exactly what, Serena. Elena deserves the truth. Serena's eyes darkened. Don't confuse her. Her voice was sharper now. This wasn't a simple conversation anymore. You think this is easy? You think just telling her the truth will magically fix everything? Nate pressed his lips together, but his resolve didn't waver. I never said it would be easy. His voice was calm but firm. But she has a right to know. You can't keep this secret forever. Serena took a step closer, her tone dropping lower. She has lived without a father for 9 years. And she's fine. Nate's expression hardened. For the first time, real frustration flickered across his face. She's not fine, Serena. Serena froze. She opened her mouth to argue, but Nate didn't give her the chance. She grew up never knowing who I was, never knowing where she came from. You don't know if she feels that void or not. You just pretend she's fine because you don't want to face the possibility that. He stopped for just a second. Then, with quiet certainty, he said the one thing they had both been avoiding. That maybe she needs me. Serena felt something twist inside her. That was what she was afraid of. Not that Elena would learn the truth, but that she would want Nate in her life. That she would rely on him. That he would become something permanent. And if one day he left again, what would happen to Elena then? Serena couldn't let that happen. Nate saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. And he knew this was his chance. His voice softened, full of a sincerity that he had never spoken with before. I don't want to hurt her, Serena. He let that sink in before continuing. But I also can't keep pretending that I don't exist. I've already lost 9 years. I can't get that time back. But at the very least, he inhaled deeply, locking eyes with her. At the very least, I can be here now. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. I want to do this right. Serena bit her lip, turning her face slightly away, as if she didn't want him to see the emotions in her eyes. Nate's voice was almost a whisper when he said, You can hate me all you want, but don't let that keep Elena from knowing her father. A long silence stretched between them. Then, finally, Serena closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and exhaled slowly. Let me think about it. Nate nodded, accepting her answer. For now. Nate never took his eyes off Serena. He could see the hesitation in her. But beneath that hesitation, there was fear. Fear that if he stepped into Elena's life, the little girl would grow attached to him, would trust him, would love him. And then, one day, he would leave. She never said it out loud, but Nate saw it in her eyes. And if there was one thing he had learned after all these years, he couldn't let Serena make this decision alone. Because this time, it wasn't just about them. This time, Elena had a right to choose. So he took a deep breath and finally said what had been on his mind for days. I want to help Elena. Serena's eyes narrowed in immediate suspicion. What do you mean? Nate didn't blink. His voice was steady. She has talent, he said, and she deserves a chance to grow it. Serena's heart skipped a beat. She already knew where this was going. And when Nate finally said it, her pulse stuttered. I want to take Elena to the Super Bowl. Serena froze. For a moment, she couldn't even breathe. When she finally spoke, her voice was sharp, edged with disbelief. The Super Bowl? You're joking, right? I'm completely serious. Nate responded immediately. My company is sponsoring the event this year. I can arrange a feature performance for young talent. It's an opportunity any musician would dream of. Serena let out a short, hollow laugh. An opportunity? She arched a brow. Like the opportunity you gave me 10 years ago. The air between them turned ice cold. Nate didn't look away. He had expected this. He was ready for it. Serena took a step forward, her voice dropping, cutting like glass. Do you know what it feels like, Nate? She asked. To stand on that stage in front of millions of people, thinking it's the biggest moment of your life, only to be humiliated and destroyed. Nate stayed silent. Do you know what it's like to walk away from music, the only thing you've ever had, because you had no choice? Her lips curled into a bitter smirk. And now you want my daughter to walk that same path? To become the next Serena Carter? Nate's jaw clenched, but his voice remained calm. "Elena is not you, Serena." She stiffened, but before she could argue, Nate pressed on. "You faced the Super Bowl alone. No one was there to protect you." His voice dropped lower, filled with the weight of his guilt. "But Elena won't be alone." He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "I will be there, and this time, I won't let anyone hurt her." Serena shook her head immediately. "No." It was firm, final. "She's too young. She doesn't need to step into that world." Nate exhaled, ready to fight back. But before he could say another word, a small voice cut through the tension. "Mom." Both of them turned at the same time. Elena stood a few feet away, watching them with bright, knowing eyes. Neither of them had noticed her standing there. Neither of them was prepared for what she was about to say. Serena blinked, quickly masking her emotions. "Elena, this isn't something you need to worry about." But Elena didn't leave. Instead, she stepped forward, her expression calm and determined. "Mom." She bit her lip for a second, then took a deep breath. "I want to do it." Serena's entire body went still. Nate's own eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't expected her to be the one to say it. Elena looked up at her mother, not stubbornly, not defiantly, just honestly. "You know I love music," she said softly, "and you know I'm not afraid." Serena felt her breath catch. Elena was too much like her, too passionate, too determined, too in love with music, and that was exactly what scared her the most. But what could she do? Could she really stop her daughter from following her dream? Could she force Elena to walk away from the one thing she loved? Just because Serena was too afraid to let her try? She couldn't, no matter how much it hurt. Serena closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting out a slow breath. When she opened them, she turned to Nate, her voice sharp but quieter now. "You promise me you won't let anything happen to her." Nate didn't hesitate. He nodded immediately. "I promise." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Serena turned to Elena. She studied her daughter's face, the quiet fire in her eyes, the unshakable resolve. And slowly, she gave a small nod. "Okay." Elena's face lit up with a smile. And Nate, for the first time in 10 years, he felt like he had a real chance to make things right. Victoria Harrington never believed in coincidences. To her, life operated under a simple rule. The strong survive, and the weak are eliminated. And if something slipped beyond her control, then it simply had to be removed. So when the name Serena Carter resurfaced after 10 years, she wasn't surprised. She was furious. A woman like Victoria always had eyes on her son. The moment Nate left the city and lingered in some insignificant small town for too long, she knew something was off. Nathaniel Harrington never did anything without a reason. And when reports came in that he had reunited with Serena Carter, Victoria knew it was time to act. But it wasn't just Serena's return that enraged her. It was the existence of a child with Harrington blood, yet completely unrecognized. Elena. The very name felt like a thorn embedded in her skin. A child born from the very woman she had worked so hard to erase from her son's life. And now, Nate planned to put her on the Super Bowl stage? To let the entire world know she existed? Unacceptable. Victoria didn't need to think twice. She had done this before. She would do it again. She would ensure that Elena Carter never set foot on that stage. Last time, she had destroyed Serena's performance. This time, she would do the same to Elena. But more than that, she would remind Nate that he could not defy her. She would teach Serena that she was never meant to return. And she would make sure that the child never had the chance to rise beyond the fate she was never meant to escape. A phone call was made. A payment was sent. And just before the Super Bowl performance, as Elena stood backstage, preparing for the biggest moment of her young life, a stranger slipped into the dressing room. His task was simple: damage the violin. One knife, one small cut along the strings. And with that, everything would collapse. But this time, Victoria underestimated her son, because this time, Nate was ready to fight back. Nate Harrington had learned his lesson. 10 years ago, he stood by and did nothing. He had let Serena face the world alone. He had let her be humiliated in front of millions. Powerless, frozen, watching as everything crumbled around her. And because of that, he lost her. But this time he would fight. The Super Bowl was only a day away. Elena was more excited than ever. She had been rehearsing all afternoon, her music filling the backstage halls. Serena, though still cautious of Nate, had begun to soften. She had allowed Elena to make her own decision. Everything seemed to be falling into place. Yet, deep in his gut, Nate couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It simmered beneath the surface like an approaching storm, a familiar weight pressing against his chest. And this time, he refused to be blind. He knew his mother too well. Victoria Harrington never lost. She had tried to erase Serena before, and now that she knew about Elena, there was no reason she wouldn't try again. Victoria wouldn't act directly. She never did, but she didn't have to. She always found people willing to get their hands dirty for her. Which is why Nate was prepared. From the moment he decided to put Elena on that stage, he had taken precautions. He hadn't told Serena. She would have fought him on it, but he couldn't afford to take risks. Nate had hired security, not in uniform, not obvious, but present. He had installed surveillance cameras in key areas, especially around Elena's dressing room. He had ensured no one could get close to her without him knowing. And on the night before the performance, his instincts proved right. It was close to midnight. Most of the crew had left. The stage was quiet, except for a few remaining staff finalizing preparations for tomorrow's show. Elena had already gone back to the hotel with Serena, but her violin was still in the dressing room. And that was Victoria's opportunity. A man, dressed as a maintenance worker, slipped backstage. He moved slowly, carefully, blending in as if he were just checking equipment. But he didn't go to the lighting, didn't go to the sound system. He went straight to Elena's dressing room, a bag slung over his shoulder. Inside it, a knife. He knelt beside the violin case, his fingers steady as he reached for the strings. And in that moment, a hand gripped his collar and yanked him backward. The man gasped, his body slammed against the wall, breath knocked out his lungs. Standing before him, Nate Harrington. His expression was unreadable. His eyes, however, were deadly. "You just made a very big mistake." His voice was low, calm, and ice cold. The man swallowed hard, panic flashing in his eyes. I was just inspecting the instruments." Nate tightened his grip. "Try lying to me again." The man trembled, but he wasn't ready to give up the name. Nate smirked, a slow, dangerous smirk. "All right then, let's help jog your memory." Before the man could react, two figures stepped into the room. Ethan Caldwell, Nate's right-hand man, and one of his security personnel. Ethan leaned casually against the doorway, taking in the scene. "Looks like we found a little rat." The man's face drained of color. He knew. He was trapped. Nate's grip didn't loosen. "You have two options." His tone remained steady, but there was no mercy in his eyes. "One, you tell me who sent you." A pause. "Two, I make sure you never work another job like this again." The man hesitated, but not for long. Within minutes, Victoria Harrington's name fell from his lips. And this time, Nate wouldn't just stand by. He wasn't the boy he was 10 years ago. He wasn't the man controlled by his mother's will, forced to watch as she tore apart the people he loved. This time, he was going to fight back, and he was going to win. Nate Harrington was no longer the powerless boy from 10 years ago. This time, he would fight. Fight for Elena. Fight for Serena. Fight against the woman who had controlled his life for far too long. But could he truly defeat Victoria Harrington? Could Serena ever trust him again? And most importantly, could Elena step onto the Super Bowl stage and make history? The battle has only just begun. Don't miss what happens next. Right arrow, hit subscribe to stay updated on the next thrilling chapter. Like if you're ready for the ultimate showdown between Nate and Victoria. Backstage had never felt this tense. The roar of the massive stadium thundered through the walls, each wave of sound crashing against the nerves of those waiting behind the curtains. Elena stood in the hallway, her small hands gripping her violin tightly, like an anchor keeping her steady. Beside her, Serena couldn't hide the worry in her eyes. She had never truly feared the stage. But now, as she watched her daughter prepare to step out before millions, she felt a kind of fear she had never known before. It wasn't because she doubted Elena's talent. It was because she knew what it felt like to have the world turn against you. She knew that this stage had the power to lift someone to greatness, but it could also destroy them. From across the hallway, Nate watched them both. He didn't speak. He didn't want to interrupt this moment. But Serena felt his gaze. She turned to face him, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in his eyes. Only absolute certainty. She'll be fine. His voice was steady, unwavering. Serena pressed her lips together, as if about to argue. But then she looked at Elena, at the way her daughter closed her eyes for a brief second, breathing deeply, centering herself, letting the music settle into her bones. Just like Serena had once done, Elena was not afraid. And Serena knew this was no longer her decision to make. A stagehand approached, placing a gentle hand on Elena's shoulder. "Are you ready?" Elena opened her eyes. There was no doubt in them. She was no longer just a child standing before a world too vast, too overwhelming. She was an artist, and she was ready. Elena took a deep breath and nodded. And then, the backstage doors swung open. Blinding light flooded in. A stadium of over 80,000 people erupted into cheers. The glow of the massive floodlights swept across the stands, creating a dazzling sea of light. Elena stepped onto the stage, each step syncing with the rhythm of the pulsing energy around her. From behind the curtain, Serena clenched her hands together, her heart pounding so fiercely she thought it might break. She had stood there once. She had felt that pressure before. But this time, it wasn't her. It was Elena, and this was her story now. The grandest stage of all, where dreams are made or broken. The Super Bowl stadium had never been this silent. Over 80,000 spectators, people accustomed to deafening cheers, dazzling performances, and extravagant displays, held their breath. Amid the sea of blinding lights, a 9-year-old girl stood alone. Elena was so small that she seemed almost swallowed by the vast stage. A stage that had once hosted the greatest legends of music. And yet, in this moment, she wasn't small at all. With a violin in her hands and the spotlight encircling her, Elena carried a presence that no one could deny. A true artist, a performer who was born to stand here. She took a deep breath. For the first time, she felt the weight of an entire stadium's silence. It wasn't like the quiet of a small cafe performance. It wasn't like the stillness of practice sessions in her bedroom. This silence was different. This silence carried gravity. But she wasn't afraid. She wasn't nervous. She was ready. And then, the first note rang out. A pure, crystalline sound, sharp and clear like the first raindrop falling onto an undisturbed lake. It didn't rush. It didn't tremble. It moved gently, steadily, as if it were finding its way into the heart of every person in that stadium. Elena didn't play like others did. She didn't just perform. She became the music. Every pull of the bow, every delicate vibration of the strings. She wasn't simply creating sound. She was creating emotion. This wasn't just a carefully arranged melody. It was a story told through music, through soaring high notes filled with hope, through deep, resonant tones that whispered secrets only the soul could understand. This wasn't just a performance. This was a statement, a declaration that she belonged here, that she was meant for this stage, that tonight at this Super Bowl, no one would forget the name Elena Carter. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman unconsciously pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart stir. A man, mid-sip of his beer, froze, his gaze locked onto the massive screen. Photographers lowered their cameras, realizing no picture could capture this moment, because no image could ever hold the soul of music. This wasn't just a performance. This was history being made. Serena stood in the shadows, just a few steps away from the stage. Her heart pounded so violently, she could feel it echoing in her chest, as if her own body was no longer under her control. She knew this feeling, that moment before stepping into the light, standing at the edge of either glory or ruin. The roaring cheers of 80,000 people faded into distant murmurs, drowned beneath the sounds inside her own mind. Because in her head there was only one voice. The past. She had stood here before, 10 years ago, on this very stage, under these very same lights. And then, snap, her violin string broke. The nightmare rushed back, swift and merciless. A hurricane of fear wrapping around her like an unshakable grip. Serena clenched her fists, nails digging in her cold palms. What if it happened again? What if Elena was destroyed just like she was? What if the Super Bowl stole her daughter's light, just as it once stole hers? Serena swallowed hard, but her throat felt dry, as if invisible hands were squeezing it shut. She should have stopped this. She should have protected Elena, kept her far away from the nightmare Serena had endured. She should have. She'll be okay. A low voice cut through her panic, grounding her back into reality. Nate. He stood beside her, watching Elena on stage. No hesitation, no fear, only absolute belief. Serena pressed her lips together, searching his expression for doubt, for any trace of the same fear that consumed her. But she found none, only certainty. And somehow, that terrified her more than anything else. Because if Nate could trust Elena to shine, then why couldn't she? On stage, Elena took a deep breath, closing her eyes for just a second. Serena held her breath, frozen in place. She felt like she was the one standing there, like it was her holding the violin. And then, the first note rang out. Clear, strong, steady. Serena shivered, not from fear, but because this wasn't her music. This was Elena, not a child who needed protecting, not a shadow following in her mother's footsteps, but an artist creating her own story. Serena felt tears sting her eyes. She hadn't planned to cry, but the tears came anyway, silent and unstoppable. Not from pain, not from regret, but because she had been wrong. She thought the Super Bowl would always be her defeat. She thought she would never escape the nightmare of that night. But now, watching Elena stand where she once fell, listening to the music rise stronger than ever, she realized the Super Bowl was no longer where she lost everything. It was where her daughter began. And that was the greatest miracle she never dared to dream of. Nate turned to look at Serena, watching as her silent tears fell. But he didn't tease her. He didn't offer empty words of comfort. He didn't even try to wipe them away. He just stood there, because he understood this moment wasn't his. It belonged to Serena and Elena, to the rebirth of a dream that once died. And when Serena didn't push him away, didn't turn her back on him, Nate knew, for the first time in 10 years, she was finally letting him stay. Elena kept playing. The notes soared, filling the vast space, wrapping around every single soul in the massive stadium. The melody climbed higher and higher, not just reaching the audience's ears, but touching something far deeper inside them. Every bow stroke, every shift of her fingers carried no hesitation, no mistakes, no fear, only absolute freedom. Elena wasn't playing to impress. She was playing because music ran in her blood. Because at this moment, it wasn't about the cameras. It wasn't about the crowd. It wasn't about anything except her and her violin. And then the final note rang out. A single silver thread of sound suspended between time and space. And when it faded, the world held its breath. Serena was so tense, she forgot to breathe. Nate felt his heart stop. Elena stood there in the middle of the grand stage, just 9 years old, but carrying the presence of a true artist. She didn't rush to bow. She didn't look around for approval. She simply waited. And then, a single clap, then another, and another, and then the entire stadium erupted. The applause roared like a tidal wave, crashing through the stands. People shot to their feet, their hands coming together in thunderous praise. They weren't just clapping. They were witnessing history. A 9-year-old had just conquered the Super Bowl, not through fame, not through gimmicks, but through pure, undeniable talent. Camera flashes exploded across the crowd. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment. This wasn't just another halftime show. This was a moment the world would never forget. Nate stood frozen, his eyes locked on the stage. He had always known Elena was special. He had believed in her. But seeing her stand there, bathed in light, embraced by the world, A rush of emotions tightened his chest. Pride, but also regret. 9 years. 9 years he had missed. He wasn't there when she played her first note. Wasn't there when she first learned to hold the bow properly. Wasn't there when she first whispered that she loved music more than anything in the world. And now, watching her shine in front of millions, he couldn't help but wonder, shouldn't it have been him teaching her? Shouldn't he have been the one guiding her through this journey? He had been absent for too long. Serena couldn't stop crying. The tears streamed down her face, but she no longer cared. She had held too much in for too long, had feared for too long, had let the past hold her prisoner for too long. But now, hearing the cheers, seeing Elena bow with a radiant smile, she knew she was finally free. Elena stood at the center of it all, her eyes shining as she looked out at the standing ovation. She couldn't believe it. All she had done was play. She had followed her heart, and now the world was applauding her. But then, a figure stepped onto the stage. Nathaniel Harrington. The stadium buzzed with whispers. What's happening? Why is Nate Harrington going up there? Camera flashes flared wildly. Serena stiffened. She had no idea what was going on. Why was Nate walking toward Elena? Why was he holding her hand and looking at her with that unshakable certainty? Serena instinctively wanted to pull Elena back. She didn't want to be in front of the cameras, didn't want to relive the nightmare. But before she could move, Nate took her hand. She froze. He squeezed gently, steady and reassuring. Then he turned to face the audience. His voice echoed through the stadium. I know, everyone here is wondering what I'm doing on this stage right now. Silence. Tens of thousands of eyes locked onto him. The cameras rolled. Nate inhaled deeply and spoke again. Tonight, I am not here as a businessman, not as a Super Bowl sponsor, but as a father. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Serena's heartbeat slammed against her ribs. Elena's eyes widened. I want to introduce you all to... Nate looked down at Elena, his gaze filled with nothing but love and pride. Elena Carter, my daughter. The stadium exploded. Reporters rushed forward. Cameras clicked frantically. The audience roared in shock and amazement. But Nate wasn't done. He turned to Serena. His eyes locked onto hers. And this, he paused, making sure every single person was watching, is her mother, Serena Carter. Serena's breath caught. She went rigid. For a second, she wanted to run, wanted to disappear. But Nate didn't let go. He held her hand tighter. And then, he faced the world. 10 years ago, Serena Carter was robbed of her moment. She was broken on this very stage. Silence. People in the crowd started murmuring. Some remembered. The headlines. The scandal. Nate's grip tightened. But she was never a failure. He turned to Serena, his voice softer but firm. You were never a failure, Serena. Tears burned in her eyes. Nate turned back to the audience. What happened that night was not her fault. It was sabotage. It was a setup. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Serena's breath hitched. But Nate didn't stop. Tonight, Elena stood on this stage and left the world speechless. He looked down at his daughter, smiling. But that music, that fire inside her, it came from her mother. His voice rang out strong and clear. Serena Carter is the reason this moment exists. A beat of stillness. And then, applause. Not wild, not deafening, but slow, emotional, genuine. One person stood, then another, and another, until the entire stadium rose to their feet, clapping. For Serena. Serena trembled, not from fear, but because she never thought she would ever have this. Nate turned to her, voice barely above a whisper. Let them see the real you. Serena took a shaky breath. She looked out at the stadium, at the people cheering for her, at Elena's beaming face, at Nate, no longer the man who once walked away, but the man standing beside her, refusing to leave. For the first time in 10 years, Serena could finally breathe, and as she stepped forward, eyes shining, heart open, she bowed. Victoria Harrington had never known a moment like this. She had always been the one in control, the one pulling the strings, manipulating the narrative, orchestrating the downfall of anyone who dared to threaten her empire. But now, right before her eyes, everything she had built was crumbling. On stage, Nate stood tall, holding Serena's and Elena's hands. The crowd rose to their feet, an eruption of applause, cheering for the young violinist who had just stunned the world, and for the mother who had once been crushed by the very machine Victoria had set in motion. The cameras captured every second. Serena Carter standing with her head held high, Nathaniel Harrington proud and unwavering, and Elena Carter radiant as the sun. And Victoria? She could only sit there, her hands trembling as they gripped the arms of her chair. She had lost. The moment the Super Bowl ended, the media exploded. Headlines flooded every major news outlet. Serena Carter, the violinist who was silenced. The truth behind the scandal that stole her future. Super Bowl 10 years ago was Serena Carter's fall from grace and orchestrated sabotage. Victoria Harrington and the secrets exposed. Who really engineered the downfall of a rising star? And then, the evidence surfaced. Documents that had been buried for a decade were suddenly dragged into the light. Former employees of the Harrington Empire began to speak out. I worked on the Super Bowl production team that year. I heard rumors about someone tampering with Serena Carter's violin, but no one dared to say a word. There was a payoff. Someone was paid to ensure her strings snapped on stage. We didn't know who was behind it back then, but now it's obvious. Journalists began re-examining every second of footage from that night. Experts analyzed the performance, and one conclusion sent shockwaves through the world. Serena Carter hadn't failed. She had been destroyed. Victoria Harrington read the headlines, her fingers trembling. She couldn't believe it. For her entire life, she had never let anything slip beyond her control. She had orchestrated everything, ensured Serena Carter would disappear, kept Nate from ever finding her, erased every trace that could tarnish the Harrington legacy. But now, the truth was out. The media tore her apart. Financial analysts speculated on the damage to the Harrington Empire. Stock prices plummeted. The board of directors called for an emergency meeting, questioning the ethics of their matriarch. Investors began withdrawing, fearing the fallout of Victoria's manipulation. The scandal spiraled, with every major network dissecting her actions. She became the subject of roundtable debates. What was Victoria Harrington's true role in all of this? Did she sabotage an innocent musician just to protect her family's reputation? Can one of New York's most powerful women ever be trusted again? And then, the board made their decision. Victoria Harrington was forced to resign as head of the Harrington Empire, stripped of her power, removed from the throne she had spent decades securing. She was no longer the queen of Wall Street, no longer the master manipulator, the untouchable elite. She was cast aside, and the very people who had once worshipped her now whispered behind her back with scorn. The press swarmed, eager for a statement, but there was no one left to defend her. No damage control that could be done. For the first time in her life, Victoria Harrington had lost, and all she could do was sit in the cold silence of her empty estate, scrolling through headline after headline, reading the words that exposed every one of her sins, watching as the world turned its back on her, just as she had once turned her back on Serena Carter. A legacy rewritten. Serena read every article with her heart pounding. She couldn't believe it. Finally, the truth had been spoken. No longer was she the failure. No longer was she the Super Bowl disaster. Now, the world called her Serena Carter, the violinist who was silenced, but never lost her music. The mother who raised a musical prodigy. The woman who rose from the ashes to prove that justice still exists. Serena closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. For 10 years, she had believed she would forever be a stain in Super Bowl history. But now, she had become a symbol of resilience. She had reclaimed her name, not because of the media, not because of their validation, but because she had seen Elena stand on that stage, shining in a way that she herself never had the chance to. And to Serena, that was the only victory that ever truly mattered. 2 days after the Super Bowl, the small town where Serena and Elena lived had never been more alive. Neighbors, regulars at the cafe, everyone was talking about the performance. About Elena, about the violin prodigy who had just graced the biggest stage in America. And most of all, about Serena Carter. She was no longer the woman tied to failure. Now, she was the mother of a genius. The woman who had risen above her past to witness her daughter shine. But even as the world turned its attention to her, Serena knew one thing. She had never belonged to that world. That afternoon, as the golden sunlight spilled across the quiet cafe, Nate found her. This time, he wasn't in a hurry. He didn't try to convince her. He simply sat across from her, patient as ever. Serena let out a quiet sigh, stirring the tea in front of her. "You want an answer, don't you?" Nate didn't look away. "I want to know what you truly feel." Serena met his gaze, her eyes no longer hesitant. "I'm proud of Elena, but I don't want to return to the stage." A silence settled between them. Nate wasn't surprised, but he still asked, "Why?" Serena took a slow sip of tea before answering. "Because it was never my world." She placed the cup down, calm but resolute. "I love music, but I don't need a stage to prove that." Her voice was steady, unwavering. "For years, I thought the Super Bowl stole my dream. But the truth is, that dream was never really mine to begin with. It was just a path I thought I had to follow." She looked at him then, a quiet certainty in her eyes. "Elena is different. She loves the stage. She thrives under the lights. And now, she's found the path that truly belongs to her." Nate studied her for a long moment before giving a slow nod. He understood. Serena wasn't walking away because of fear. She was walking away because, for the first time, she knew exactly what she wanted. And this time, he wouldn't try to change her mind. A small voice came from behind them. "Dad." Nate froze. His heartbeat slammed against his ribs like it was trying to escape. Slowly, almost cautiously, he turned around. Elena stood there, her dark eyes filled with quiet resolve. His breath caught in his throat. "Did you just call me?" Elena pressed her lips together, then nodded. There was no doubt in her gaze. No hesitation. "I don't want to call you sir or mister anymore." She lifted her chin, her voice clear. "You're not a stranger. You're my father, and I want to call you Dad." Nate felt something inside him shatter. He had been called many things in his lifetime. A billionaire, a businessman, the heir to the Harrington Empire. But never had anyone called him that. "Dad." His knees nearly buckled as he slowly knelt before her, his hands resting gently on her small shoulders. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Are you sure?" Elena's smile was small but certain. "I'm sure." Nate closed his eyes for a moment, swallowing hard. And then, he pulled her into his arms. Tightly, desperately, like he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. Elena wrapped her arms around him just as fiercely. From the side, Serena watched in silence. She didn't say a word, but for the first time, she felt a wound inside her begin to heal. On the rooftop of the cafe, as the golden hues of sunset painted the sky, Serena, Nate, and Elena stood together, gazing into the distance. No word were needed, no grand promises. They had found each other. They had endured pain, loss, and misunderstandings. But more importantly, they had not lost one another. Serena let out a soft smile, her voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes, love is never truly lost. It's just waiting to be played again at the right moment. Nate reached for her hand, his touch warm, his gaze gentle. Elena squeezed her father's hand, her smile bright and full of life. Music still echoed in their hearts. And this time, it was no longer an unfinished melody. It was a symphony, whole and complete. The end. 10 years ago, Serena Carter lost everything on the Super Bowl stage. But she never could have known that one day, it would be her daughter, Elena, who would stand in that very place, finishing the dream she had left behind. 10 years ago, Nate Harrington let Serena fall into darkness because he wasn't brave enough to stand by her side. But he never could have known that one day, he would stand on that very stage and declare to the world that he would never abandon his family again. This is not just a story about a violin performance that shook the Super Bowl. This is a story about love that was never truly lost, only waiting for the right moment to be played again. And finally, it has been played, completely. Thank you for being part of this journey. If you were moved by Serena, Nate, and Elena's story, don't forget to like to support more heartfelt stories. Comment your favorite moment. What touched you the most? Subscribe now so you never miss another emotional and meaningful story. Thank you for listening. See you in the next story.